morning. Just briefly, I'll have a few remarks and then I'll be eager to take your questions. As Tony mentioned, I have 5 children. My wife and I, I term limited myself when I was in the Louisiana legislature. I served 2 terms. We averaged about 2 children per term, so she was glad that I had term limited myself. But we had a surprise a few years ago when we had our 5th child. He is now 3. Samuel is quite a character. About 1.5 years ago, he became kind of, I would say, addicted to chocolate milk. And every night he has a routine. And he announces to my wife, it's time to drink chocolate milk, sit in Dad's chair, and watch the news. Now, see, I have taught him some good habits. Drinking chocolate milk, not the news. But she's trying to break that, and she told him a few weeks ago, she said, well, no chocolate milk, Samuel. Well, he fell to the floor and said, no chocolate milk, I die. And he laid there motionless for a moment with his eyes closed, and then when nobody moved to his rescue with chocolate milk, he opened one eye and realized that the act wasn't going anywhere. Well, in many ways, I see Congress doing the same thing. No big government deficit spending, we die. And they're feigning this act of nibbling away at the margins of what Americans realize is a huge crisis. And this has not been lost on evangelical social conservative voters. There was a national survey in April that was conducted by the Barna Group. George Barna is known for having his finger on the pulse of born-again evangelical voters. And the issues that will most affect candidates, the way people view the candidates and whom they support for president in the 2012 election, are touching on these big government issues. The issues most likely to influence which candidate voters will embrace are health care, which 64% said would have a lot of influence on the candidate they choose. Now, it's interesting on the health care issue because these are not just fiscal issues, and that's what's important to understand about the social conservative voter. It is not this, they do not approach this with a dichotomous view of the issues, but rather a homogenized view. If you'll recall the big debate over health care, the one stumbling block that the president ran into that almost caused this house of health care cards to fall was the abortion issue. So this is both a fiscal and a social issue. 60% said tax policies. They are not out there, unlike others, screaming for the government to tax them more. They are asking for less taxes, more responsible government, and of course employment policies, 50%. Clearly the economy is impacting social conservatives just like it is everyone else across the country. Now, this is one of the critical voting blocs in America, born-again Christians, who have represented, according to Barna, nearly half of the votes cast in recent presidential elections. But evangelicals, when you break it down further, evangelicals represent almost half of the votes cast in Republican primaries, which makes them a core constituency for those seeking the Republican nomination. And, of course, you ask the question, if you look at the Republican candidates that are currently pursuing the nomination, how many of them are pro-life? Well, all of them have staked out policy positions that are pro-life. How many of them support traditional marriage? All of them stake out positions in support of traditional marriage. Only one takes a position in support of civil unions. So clearly, just like our economy works on supply and demand, our political process works on supply and demand, and the candidates know what the demand is among those who vote in Republican primaries. Now, what's interesting, again, going back to Barna, among evangelicals, the impact of health care and abortion on their candidate selection is the same today as it was 19 years ago. Now, we're led to believe by the media and trends that things are changing, basically every 6 months. That's not the case with evangelical voters. I know this is hard for some to comprehend, but let me again go to Barna. He points out, and I'm quoting from him, evangelical Christians distinguish themselves by their consistency. The issues that mattered most to evangelicals in 1992 are the same issues that matter to them today. Now, some analysts have suggested this means evangelicals are out of touch with the times and are stuck in the past. But, and this is what I agree very strongly with what George Barna says, a more realistic interpretation is that evangelicals' perspectives have remained stable because they are based on a worldview that does not shift with the ebb and flow of cultural preferences and fads. That is where evangelicals are. They see a distinction between right and wrong, good and bad, and they know what is moral and immoral, and they have stood through the test of time based on these truths. Now, there's no misconception that among conservatives, what the ultimate objective is in 2012. It's to win elections. It's to win the White House, and it is to win a working majority in the United States Senate. But history shows that conservatives win when they actually are conservative. You know, we've heard Governor Haley Barbour several times say that purity is the enemy of victory. Well, that, I would say, is a nice soundbite. But if you want to win the Republican nomination or the White House, it will not carry you there. When it comes to conservative principles, compromise is the companion of losers. Now, having said that, don't expect values voters to roll out some form of purity pledge. However, you can expect a pledge of fidelity to the core principles of American conservatism. The successful candidate will give equal emphasis to the concerns of voters that were described by Ronald Reagan. They were a coalition that he put together, fiscal, social, and foreign policy conservatives. Voters value the coalition, and they seek a candidate who will pledge to once again make America militarily strong and secure, economically prosperous and free, and socially healthy and virtuous. The right candidate will understand the interconnectedness of these three chords of conservatism and will work to unify and strengthen them. Now, it is this recognition that has drawn presidential candidates to FRC Action's annual Values Voter Summit, which will be held in just a little over a week. Every one of the major Republican candidates will be there, and they will come before the value voters, a good representation, and there will be a straw poll at that event at which they will be able to express their preference for the candidate that most successfully brings together the conservative coalition. Now, the right candidate, there's just a few of the qualities that I believe value voters will be looking for. The right candidate will understand that big government doesn't just happen. Big government and budget deficits are in part the natural outcome of government policies that foster a deficit of character. Big government is what happens when family life fractures, when mothers avoid marriage and fathers flee responsibility. The right candidate will understand and will recognize the fact that the natural family is looked down, when it's looked down upon, we will by force be required to look up to big government. The compatible candidate will not be distracted from the flirtations of political correctness that threaten to wreck our first freedoms. Anything short of an absolute commitment to defending the freedom of religion and speech and strengthening the family will make the candidate a non-starter with social conservatives. I think there are many in this race that have the potential to have the enthusiastic support of social conservatives, and we're looking forward to having them all at the Values Voter Summit in just a little over a week away. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions that you might have. Certainly.
Come on, some questions. Sorry, could you identify who you are too?
Nick Cimitelli from Bold Faith Type, the Faith and Public Life. You mentioned that social conservatives don't want their taxes raised, that they think taxes are too high already. Would you disagree then with candidates
Yeah, I've not run across a single working family, whether you call that middle class or not, that suggests that their tax burden is not high enough. And it's not, I think Americans are willing to make legitimate sacrifices. They're willing to help their neighbor. They're willing to engage and help those who are in need. What they are not willing to do is support inefficient, ineffective government with higher taxes. And when we are arguing about cutting a billion here and a billion there, I mean, that's federal pocket change. We're not talking about really getting to the core of misspending. I mean, we need to be talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in cuts in our deficit if we're to get our economy going again. So I don't see any desire for families to pay more as long as government is failing to spend efficiently and effectively.
Sir?
Josh Letterman with the Hill newspaper. When Rick Perry entered the race, he was touted as sort of the white knight of social conservatives and evangelicals, and then recently he's taken a lot of heat on immigration and the HPV issue and some other social issues. Do you expect that those are going to work against him with socially conservative voters?
I think, there was an initial, anytime somebody gets into a race, I mean, there's an initial surge that they have. And he had an initial surge, and now it's kind of leveled off. And I think he's going to have to work his way back in to being a strong front runner. I mean, some polls show him ahead, others show Romney ahead. I think that he is still working on getting his responses to those issues down to a very concise message. I will say I think it was troubling what he said on the immigration, and that a lot of people took offense at that to suggest that if you uphold the law, that is heartless. Whether that was a poor choice of words, we've not seen him in another debate since correcting those statements.
Sir?
Thank you. I have a question regarding both frontrunners, actually. With regards to Rick Perry, he endorsed Rudy Giuliani for president in 2008. Should that play any factor with values voters?
Yeah, Fred, that's a good question. And it kind of goes back to what I said about a purity pledge. I think there's no purity pledge by social conservatives saying, if you've ever messed up, you're out of, you can't be a contender for my vote and my support. But I do think there is a fidelity pledge to core conservative values. And so what happened last year, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, is less of an issue than the positions that you are advocating for now. So I think it does cause people to take pause. Why did you support Giuliani? I think he's answered that question. He is, what he has said is that it's because of the judges that he would have appointed, strict constructionist, which for most social conservatives, that gets us where we want to be. We just want the courts out of dictating social policy or any type of policy for that matter. Again, I think it's the positions that one stakes out. Now, the one thing about Mitt Romney's campaign this time, his candidacy, he is not speaking as strongly to the social issues as he did 4 years ago. He was working very hard to capture social conservative vote. I, for one, was comfortable with his positions and his explanations as to why he had changed. Again, it's more of the positions you're advocating going forward and a credible explanation as to why those have changed. He has not given a lot of attention in this cycle, which does cause some to say, is that commitment to those issues genuine and solid? So I think that if he is to emerge as the front runner and the standard bearer for conservatives, he's going to have to shore that up.
Sir?
Yeah, Paul Strand with CBN News. The accepted wisdom is that anybody that could be embraced by the social conservatives couldn't win the general election. How do you react to
Well, I think almost anybody with a heartbeat can win the general election this time around. I mean, you look at the president's polling numbers, you know, that fluctuate between low 40s and the high 30s. In the last 10 presidential candidates who have sought re-election since World War II, not a single one with approval rating below 48% has won re-election. When you look at the unemployment numbers, 9.1%, the highest unemployment of a president who won re-election since World War II was Ronald Reagan at 7.4%. This president is in deep trouble. His domestic policies have failed. His foreign policies have failed. He has not succeeded in doing anything but dividing this nation further. I think whoever succeeds in getting the Republican nomination will replace this president. And that is the prayers of a lot of people, that this president is a one-term president, lest we lose this country forever.
Sir.
Seth McLaughlin with the Washington Times. What do you make of reports with Chris Christie maybe getting into the race, and what do social conservatives make of him and that possibility?
You know, I think there is a good field of candidates to choose from at present. I think Chris Christie has done some really good things, but that's relative when you consider where he's at. New Jersey doesn't take a lot to do some good things up there. But he's made some very questionable appointments of some key positions. He has some backing from individuals who are clearly on the other side of most social issues. So I think he would have a difficult time gaining a lot of support among social conservatives.
Yeah,
Lou?
Liberty National Press Club. There are two Mormon candidates among the Republican contingent. Do most evangelical Christians consider Mormonism a legitimate Christian religion?
I do not believe they consider it to be a Christian religion. There is, you know, we've had a lot of discussion now over the last 4 years, and Christians, evangelicals, Catholics have worked very closely with Mormons in a number of key issues across the country. Prop 8 in California would not have been successful, I believe, had not the Mormon Church joined ranks with evangelicals and Catholics to advance marriage there in that state. So there's certainly a working relationship, but I think there's clearly, when people think of it from a theological standpoint, there is a distinction. The strength for Mitt Romney would not be in trying to say my religion is the same as yours, don't worry about it. It's more, again, going to the policy positions. And I think the more he shores up his policy positions, more will become comfortable with him. And I'm not saying that that bridge has been, or that gap has been bridged, and it's going to take some work, I think, based on what I hear from some.
Sir.
Travis Waldron from Think Progress. You mentioned Chris Christie, and he has signed. He said he's fine with civil unions in New Jersey, and also he signed anti-bullying legislation that some advocates have said was the toughest anti-bullying law in the country. Is that one of those issues that you think would cause any problems with valued voters?
I think when you look more at some of his appointments he's made to some key positions, those that are supportive of abortion, you know, when it comes to the anti-bullying, I think you will find among evangelicals, Protestants, Catholics, a strong desire to make our schools a safe place for all children. And no child should go to school and be bullied for any reason, whether it's their religious conviction, whether it is their looks, whether it's the fact that they're overweight, or if they are of a particular sexual orientation. What is of concern when it comes to the so-called anti-bullying legislation is that it is used to advance a particular view of sexual orientation and leads to the bullying by teachers and administrators of other students. That's where there's a problem. And so it depends on the actual legislation.
And on the civil unions?
I think it's a concern with some. As we've seen, that is usually just a stepping stone for a demand for marriage, while polling data would suggest, as Americans are, pretty live and let live, they're okay with certain benefits being extended, which are already there. You just simply have to take an extra step to get them. They're okay with some of the benefits being extended, but clearly when you see the national polling, there is an objection to redefining marriage to accommodate same-sex couples.
Can you clarify what the appointments are that Chris Christie made?
I think it was Department of Health. I'm not sure exactly if it was. Tom, was it at the Health and Hospitals?
Yeah, Department of Health.
Yeah.
For, in our opinion, important appointment. And there were a few others that escaped.
But that's an important one, Health and Hospitals in states, because they set the rules and oversee the implementation of block grants and federal funds coming into the state.
And what was it about that person that?
I think it was a position on life. They did not have a pro-life position.
Sir?
Yeah, did Chris Christie's appointment of a Muslim to the bench in New Jersey, was that a concern at all for socially conservative voters?
I have not heard much about that. I'm sure that it does create some concern among some.
Oh, here, and then I'll get back to you, sir.
I want to kind of go with my question a different way. This idea that values voters, what they stand for, that a candidate that would be really acceptable to them, that most of the American people, they don't agree with those same values. Could you address that idea that the general electorate is way different than the values voters?
Well, let me go at your question a different way. I don't think there is a vast distinction between evangelical voters or social conservative voters and the general populace. I would say there is an issue of priority. I would say the general populace is going to be more passionate and single-focused, primarily right now on the economy and those issues. While those are still very important and probably rank at the top of concerns among social conservatives, those are meshed with the other issues. Where does the candidate stand on life? Where does this candidate stand on the sanctity of marriage and the position of the family? And so they rank those through those issues. This idea that a candidate that would be supported by social conservatives that would win the Republican nomination would be unacceptable to the general populace is just not true. I think the opposite is true. We saw that in the last election cycle. There was a Republican nomination that was not acceptable to social conservatives. He did not have the enthusiastic support of social conservatives, and as a result, the Republicans lost the general election. You need, I mean, a lot of these polls is, and I mean, I know I'm talking to the choir here, so to speak, that when you look at these polls, you have to really find out who they're polling. Are they polling registered voters? Are they polling likely general election voters? Are they polling primary voters? And when we're talking about the Republican presidential candidates, it's important to be polling likely primary voters who are going to be more passionate. And when they get involved and they get a candidate onto the ballot, the issue here is going to be passion in the general election. How hard will they work? Now, I think, again, let me go back to what I said earlier. Conservatives, I believe, will be supportive of whoever the nominee is based on the current field in order to replace Barack Obama. But how high the degree of intensity is depends upon the candidate. And I think that could make a difference, although, again, I think this president is in serious trouble with voters across the spectrum.
With Privy again, I had the honor of being across the hall here when Jeremiah Wright was our speaker. And our president, who many people feel is the smartest man since Thomas Jefferson was president, claims to never have heard anything Jeremiah Wright said. How do values voters perceive the incumbent president and his faith and position on issues?
Well, good question, Lou. Again, I think and I'm speaking for the social conservative evangelical voters. I mean, that's who I interact with. That's who I travel the country. I'm in different places almost every week. It really comes on how does that faith impact what you do. It's one thing to claim to be a believer, a follower of Jesus Christ, but when your policies support taxpayer funding of abortion, when it leads to the redefinition of marriage, when you embrace religious or the freedom of worship versus the freedom of religion, there's an inconsistency there. It's an incompatibility with a claim to be a follower of Jesus and the actual policies that your administration is putting forth. So I think the president can, continually claim and make statements, but the evidence is not found in his policies.
I think Scripture says, by your deeds men shall know you.
Well, and the deeds are pretty evident of this administration. First on his list was the striking down the Mexico City policy, which uses our tax dollars to support abortion overseas. Then we see center in the health care reform or health care takeover is government funding of abortion. That we see the president refusing to defend a law that was passed by a bipartisan majority of Congress and signed by Bill Clinton, the Federal Defense of Marriage Act. So his deeds are pretty evident.
Sorry, Joe from Religion News Service. You said that the values voters will definitely support whatever Republican candidate there is, but the degree of intensity could have some impact on who it is. So would you say that socially conservative voters would think that the more intense the rhetoric of their candidate, the better?
No, I don't think it's the rhetoric. I don't think it's the rhetoric. I think it's the well thought out positions. I mean, it's kind of there's a hierarchy of kind of list when you go through. All right, you consider a candidate, you think, all right, what are the positions they're advocating for? Are they pro-life, pro-marriage? Are they pro-family? Do they talk about these issues? Are they strong on defense? Then you look at their record. Where have they stood on these issues? What have they done in the past? How have they delivered? And then you listen to how they're able to convincingly convey that message. So all of those things factor in, but it's not the rhetoric. Social conservative voters are a little more. They understand and process a little bit more than I think they're given credit for. I mean, they really think through these issues and are able to, I think, make very informed and wise decisions on whom they support. They can usually ferret through a phony.
Sir.
Back to the immigration issue on Perry, is there any response he can give to social conservative voters over the in-state tuition and his opposition to a border fence that could please them? And if not, or if so, what does social conservatives want to see as far as the border goes?
Well, I think it's been discussed pretty thoroughly among the candidates in general. I think it's a two-step process. I would say that social conservatives are not at all heartless when it comes to the issue of immigration. I think first they want to see border security. A nation without borders is not a nation. And they want to see our borders secure and the flow of illegal immigrants stopped. Now, that does not mean they do not want immigrants. We are a country of immigrants, and they want people who come here and play by the rules. And I think the church, in fact, Bishop Harry Jackson and I co-authored a book a couple of years ago, Personal Faith, Public Policy, in which we really take on 7 of the key issues facing the country, and one of them was immigration. And we believe that social conservatives, especially in the Protestant churches, are eager and ready to be a part of the solution of immigration, helping assimilate people into the culture who are here and want to be here legally. And there's certainly some policies and laws that need to be changed to make this process easier and fairer and more family friendly. But simply to say that, you know, the laws don't matter and we're just going to, you know, forget about it and start over, that's not going to work.
So is there anything he can say about his current position that's going to?
Well, I mean, I think he's just going to have to, I mean, that's problematic. When you think about it, now, someone brought it up to me the other day, I live in Virginia and I go to Texas, or I live in Louisiana, I go to Texas. I wouldn't do that, but if I decided to go to school in Texas, I would have to pay a higher rate than someone who was illegally in the country. That doesn't seem right. So I think I understand the underlying premise, and that is we want to give opportunities to people. And we do not want to bar anybody from succeeding and being a part of advancing America and our society and pursuing the American dream. However, there are rules, and we are a nation of rules, of law, and we've got to play by those rules.
Since the Palestinians are making a bid for statehood right now, what would the social conservatives want to see their candidate take a position on that?
Oh, I'm sorry.
On the Palestinian bid for statehood.
Well, I think there's not complete unanimity among social conservatives on the issue of a two-state solution, although it's pretty strong that most social conservative evangelicals have concerns with a two-state solution that would divide Jerusalem and would weaken Israel's ability to defend itself. In fact, I think you have actually seen in this administration a strengthening of the relationship between evangelicals and the Israeli government and in Israel in general. So I think that, again, this administration's policies on the foreign front, especially as it pertains to Israel, have been a failure. I mean, as we saw last week playing out at the UN, the president forced into a position of backing away from a solution that he had proposed because it's an unworkable solution. And Israel is our one key ally in that region. And this goes beyond social conservatives and evangelicals to even in Congress, where you have a strong bipartisan support for Israel.
Tony, I have one question. Did I read correctly that next week all of the Republican presidential candidates will be at the conference with the exception of Mr. Huntsman?
Yes.
And if so, why? That's my next question.
Why will they all be there? Because that's the place to be.
Why will Mr. Huntsman not be there?
You'd have to ask him that question.
He was extended the invitation.
Oh, yes. In fact, President Obama is welcome to come and speak if he'd like. We invited everyone. We invited all of the presidential candidates who reached a certain polling number. I think it had to be, was it 3 or 4%? 3% in any national poll in order to be invited to speak. Because if it had been lower than that, I could have spoken. So he was actually one of the first to decline the invitation. It's going to be a great event. We've got even more speakers, national speakers, now knocking at the door wanting to be a part of it. We're expecting probably a couple thousand people on the straw poll that will be conducted. It'll be Michelle Bachmann, Herman Cain, Newt Gingrich, John Huntsman will be on the straw poll. Ron Paul, Rick Perry, Mitt Romney, Rick Santorum, and then undecided will be there as well. And then we have a list of vice presidential candidates, which is actually a little bit more extensive.
And a second, any other questions here?
When will that poll come out?
We'll release that on noon actually about 3 o'clock on Saturday. After the polling is conducted. The polling will take place, I think is it noon on Friday, Tom?
That's what it begins Friday morning and then ends noon.
Presidential candidates will start speaking Friday morning and will speak up until mid-morning on Saturday. And then the polling will end at noon, and we'll release the results about 3 o'clock.
Yeah, just, would you have anything, one interesting thing about this field is that there are 2 libertarians in the field. What would social conservatives think about Ron Paul and Governor Johnson?
Well, what's interesting about Ron Paul is that we actually spent a week, our values voter bus, by the way, which we will be rolling out I'll let you in on a little advanced secret here. We're going to be rolling out our values voter bus at the Values Voter Summit that will be traveling the state for the next, or the country for the next 12 to 14 months, going into key swing states. We'll be working in key states where there are Senate elections, and we'll be doing what we did in Iowa leading up to the straw poll. Going in, we visited about 22 counties, had about 5 of the presidential candidates with us at various times, making the connection between the economic and the social issues. I mean, if we all want to shrink the size of government and the cost of government, but we'll never shrink the size and scope of government until we strengthen the American family. And that's our message. And we're taking that to the values voters and engaging them. We'll be doing voter registration in churches throughout this 14-month tour every weekend. And we will be out there aggressively stirring up, exciting, and mobilizing the social conservative voters. And so we're going to be rolling that out at the Values Voters Summit. When we did that in Iowa, it was interesting that Ron Paul, when he spoke before the balloting, talked about the importance of liberty, but then used the balance, almost the majority of his speech, to talk about the sanctity of human life. I believe the reason is that he understands the voters. And as the Republican nominees understand the primary voters, even libertarians will be talking about the essential nature of these core conservative values if they desire and hope to succeed.
Do you see this at this point as a 2-man race in the Republican field? And
No.
what evidence outside of that puts in that direction?
Well, I mean, let me just go back to where we were a few years ago, 3 years ago, when everyone had all but crowned Rudy Giuliani and it was his race. He was going to win. And he sunk like a rock. Not a rock star, a rock. And all of the conventional wisdom went out the door. So I think, politics, and I spent, a decade in office myself. I've been a candidate for the U.S. Senate. In politics, a day is like a lifetime, and a lifetime a day. Any event, any performance, any statement, as we have seen in other elections, can change the dynamics tremendously. So I would say this is far from a settled lineup, in that the current front runners are destined to continue to be the front runners.
One more question for you. Several states are having public plebiscites on gay marriage next year. How active a role is the Family Research Council planning to play, if any? And which states are they? North Carolina?
Yeah, Tony, thanks for asking that question. I made a note to mention that. It's Minnesota and North Carolina.
Right.
And what's interesting here, and I'm glad you brought that up, because what's interesting in North Carolina, not only will our bus will be in North Carolina and Minnesota, spending a lot of time, but we're told that voters really don't care about these issues. Now, has anybody heard that? That we don't care about, the issue of same-sex marriage is not an issue anymore. Well, it obviously was an issue with the governor of North Carolina, because she is on the ballot at the same time and told the majority leader, did not want the issue on the ballot because it would affect her election and the election of other Democrats. And so the only way, after 9 years struggle, and of course in the 2010 election the Republicans gained the majority in North Carolina, the compromise to get this through to voters was to put it on the primary ballot in May. If it has no effect and people don't care about it, why couldn't it be on the general election? The issue is they do care about it. In fact, every time it's been put on the ballot, in 31 states where people have had an opportunity to express themselves on the issue of marriage, it's 31-0. Now, any athletic team would die for a record like that. And to suggest that the American public is changing on this issue, that traditional marriage is losing, is false.